introduce myself. My name is Mari Carmen Cárdenas Bueno. I'm from Mexico, and I'm a member of the New Reality magazine, which is an internationalist platform of progressive ideas, a bilingual digital magazine in Spanish and English that is willing to construct a new narrative of revolutionary and creative productive forces. We kindly invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our social media. We also invite you to subscribe in our website to get our last number on title, which title is Populism and a State of Confusion. It's a free PDF magazine. And this edition also includes the letter of solidarity with Julian Assange, which will be delivered to the government as soon as the pandemic is below control, and we still invite you to sign up. The format for this talk is an open microphone of 20 minutes each of our guests talk about some important topics that are on the public opinion in UK. And at the end of the rest, for the last 20 minutes, we will open the microphones for questions and answers. So we invite somebody's microphone is open and we get a lot of noise. Christian, is that you?
Christian, it might be
Yeah, okay. And so if for our audience, if you want to write your questions or just jump into the questions and answers time at the end of the talk. We have to finish at 12 noon as we are leading our way to the protest in St. Peter's Square in Manchester. In case you want to join us too, we have the honor to listen and talk this morning with Karen Reissmann and Lamin Touray. Is that the way I'm pronouncing properly? Thank you. Who are going to share with us their perspectives about some topics that need to be heard. We think that people, give me a second. We think that people need to know what is happening with the resistance that exists and needs to grow to defend our civil rights to protest in the UK. In the UK, Black Lives Matter and Killing the Bill are some subjects of the resistance. The audience will be interested to listen what Black Lives Matter represents to Manchester, the actions that has been taken, the authoritarian legality that put Karen a repressive fine for defending the rights of everyone to express themselves, but also the solidarity expressed and shown with other struggles, like the Gypsy, Roma, and travelers in the context of the bill, which pretends to silence the raised voices. What strategies we need to implement in future resistances, and what are the actions that need to be taken, among others. Now I'm going to introduce and give a warm welcome to our guests. We have our Karen Reissmann, is a long-standing socialist, is a member of the SWP in the United Kingdom and a nurse from Manchester. So SWP, Karen, stands for Socialist
Workers' Party.
Okay, thank you. She's on public sector. She's a public sector union in a Unison's National Executive Committee. And last March the 7th, she was fined with £10,000 for organizing a protest at NHS paid 1% insulting offer. And in 2007, she was victimized at work for speaking out and organizing against cuts and privatization of our NHS. And Lamin Touray is a long-standing socialist activist defending the right of people in Manchester, organizing the resistance against right-wing movements. He's a real fighter of the causes of a fighter for justice, who, along with Karen Reissmann and other invaluable neighbours, kneel down every Wednesday at 6 p.m. at Hulme Park protesting the assassination of George Floyd and many other Black citizens, not just in the United States, but around the world, because Black Lives Matter. And I just want to let you know, in case you are interested, that the Chauvin court hearing is now. taking place, and what the witnesses have described, what they have seen is really, I mean, very, it has a great impact on what's going on. We'll see if he gets convicted or not. Okay, so here I'm going to give the microphone to Karen. Welcome, Karen. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate your taking the time to spend this with us.
Thank you very much, Mary Camille, for inviting me and Lamin. Really, really pleased to be here today. I want to start by talking a little bit about the history in Britain, where since the banking crisis of 2008, where when banks gamble, they take all the profits, and when they lose, they wanted us to pay, we've had 11 years of austerity where they've cut public services, they've cut benefits, they've cut wages, they've cut conditions at work. And at the same time, they've increased scapegoating of anybody to try and get us to divert our attention from the governments and businesses who are cutting our standard of living, and to get us to fight each other. So lots of anti-migrant legislation and anti-migrant speeches from ministers, lots of racism, lots of blame of single parents, of Muslims, anybody that they can think to try and get us to fight each other. So before the pandemic started a year ago, there was already quite a big cut in public services, which meant we were in a very poor state to be able to deal with the pandemic. And some countries did really well in the pandemic, so have had hardly any deaths and have managed it on a public health basis, and have had handfuls. In Britain, we have had one of the worst death rates in the world, and one of the worst impacts on the economy, where they've consistently sort of, refused to do public health. At the beginning, they just thought we could all get it. And there was even an article in the Telegraph, a right-wing paper, that said that because this pandemic affects mainly disabled and old people, it doesn't really matter if those people die, because we don't make money out of old people and disabled people. So some really quite horrible policies without enough personal protection equipment, and as I say, lots of deaths, and those deaths were quite disproportionately affecting Black and brown people. So it was very obvious I'm a health worker, to health workers, that when you talk to people who worked in COVID wards, that the number of Black and brown faces in intensive care and on COVID wards was really high, including quite a lot of our health colleagues and our sort of home care workers. So that's the background to the anti-racist fight. So then when George Floyd was murdered, and we saw the murder on the video in that quite horrific, callous way in which sort of Chauvin kept his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I think the anger that already existed from the pre-pandemic austerity, from the pandemic and the way that it was affecting people, and then from watching that racism and the reality of what being Black can mean, I think that anger built up and all came out spontaneously. And there were massive demonstrations around the world, including in Britain. There are estimates in Britain that over 2 people have protested as part of Black Lives Matter since George Floyd's death. And certainly in Hulme, we've been part of that, where I live in Manchester. And that movement's been very anti-racist. It's been very young in the main. It's been a mixture of Black, brown and white. And it's very political. It's not just about racism, although racism was the initial thing that got people out, but actually about the pandemic and the way that the government have massacred our lives, and also massacred our jobs, our standards of living, our services, the health service. And I think that movement carries on today. We have a Tory government clearly sort of pro-capitalist, and they know that the anger is out there about what they're doing, and they know that it's not being articulated through Parliament. We have a Labour Party with a new Labour leader, Keir Starmer, who has chosen to prioritise sort of telling capitalists and big business that he's now a safe pair of hands for big business. It's not like the left-wing Jeremy Corbyn. He's no threat. And so he's gone along with and supported Tory policies over the last year in a way that's just heartbreaking to hear the Labour opposition time and again say, well, I agree with Boris Johnson about this. And the primary people that he's chosen to attack have been the left in his party and people who are fighting back. So there's been lots of expulsions and lots of really difficult attacks that continue to imply that the left in Britain are virtually all anti-Semitic, which is partly linked to people's support for Palestine and partly just a complete distortion of what's being said. So we don't really have anybody in Parliament in the mainstream that articulates the anger that people feel. There are a minority of left-wing MPs who are very, very good, but they are a minority and they're consistently under attack, not just from the Tory government, but from the Labour opposition as well. And on top of that, we have a trade union movement with a few exceptions. So the National Education Union that represents people in schools has launched a big fight over the last year for health and safety in schools. And on a number of occasions, school workers, teachers and teaching assistants have refused to go in on the basis that it's not safe to do so. So the government wanted to reopen schools in June, and it was on the back of teachers saying we're not going to go in and do it that they ended up backing down and not reopening them until September. And then in January, when they were going to reopen them again, it was the action of teachers and school staff saying we're not doing it. And that's been quite a strong building, and they've recruited thousands and thousands of members because they've been firm about the action that they've taken. And they've developed, I think it's 6,000 new union reps. So they've got more union stewards as a result of taking action. And there are small strikes in other unions, but in the main, the big trade unions, of which I'm a member of Unison, which is the public sector union, there has been very little mass response to the attacks we face. And the government have used the pandemic to stop protests and to say we have to stay at home, we have to protect the public, we have to, and therefore protests aren't. And the unions in the main have gone along with that, and that's made it more difficult. And for me, I'm a health worker, and I do think that every day we don't protest out on the streets about what the government are doing, we're allowing the government to carry on killing people, we're allowing them to carry on to discriminate, we're allowing them to carry on cutting our living standards, and that we have to say that we cannot let them do that because their policies are murderous policies that are killing us, and we have to stand up and resist that, albeit in a safe way. So I think the government understand that on the working class side, we have some weaknesses in terms of the Labour Party, who are supposed to be the opposition but aren't, and the trade union leaders that are supposed to organise the opposition and haven't been in the main. But there is such a pool of anger, and really they see that anger emerge. We've seen it over climate change over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. In Britain, we have Extinction Rebellion. I don't know what they're called around the world, but Extinction Rebellion have done some massive protests that have been peaceful but very disruptive. And Black Lives Matter emerged into huge demonstrations. And so the government understand that they might need to calm down and stop that. So they brought in a police crime sentencing and court bill, which has many strands. One of them, it gives the police and the Home Secretary the power to decide which protest is allowed and which protest isn't. And if they think a protest might disrupt, or even if it might annoy people, even if it's one person protesting who annoys people, they have the potential to ban it and to criminalise people who carry on protesting. So there's a really big attack on our right to protest. It also gives the police powers, increased powers generally in crime, so they've got more powers to stop and search. And in Britain at the moment, if you're black or brown, then you are 9 times more likely to be stopped by the police than if you're white. So the difference in racial profiling that our police force engage in is being not just legitimised, but it's being enhanced. And therefore we know that if that bill goes through, it gives permission for the police to continue in that racist way. And we had a recent report from the government that came out this week that said that they no longer believe that institutional racism exists. It's really just individuals, both individual black people who haven't worked hard enough at school or are criminals, or individual white people who are racist that you deal with in an individual basis. So of undermining the attack on the real attack that black people and brown people face every day of their lives. But it also does things like that. Sort of one of the people that they've consistently scapegoated in Britain is the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community, and they're now making it a criminal offence to trespass. So if you park your caravan somewhere that you haven't got permission to do, and that might even be your own land. So we've had Gypsy and Roma sites where they've bought the land but haven't had the right planning permission. Those camps have been smashed up and people driven out of it in the most horrific, brutal police assaults a few years ago. And it's about saying not only can they do that, but they can now confiscate your caravan, your home, and they can punish you with prison. And we have an increase in sentencing where you can get 10 years jail for damaging a statue, because during the Black Lives protest, there was loads of damaging of statues. Well, not loads, there was a bit of damaging of statues, particularly in Bristol, where they pulled down a slave owner that's been celebrated in Bristol for a couple of 100 years. And you think, why are we celebrating slave owners? So the bill is about looking at who is protesting, who is fighting back, and how do we criminalise and enhance those scapegoating. And I suppose the protests that have come out of that have been incredible. And, you know, I think that there's been a number of reasons for it. One is that during the pandemic, one of the exceptions that they did make is that they did say there was a right to protest up until December. When they brought in the new rules in December, January, they said there's no longer a right to protest, so that there's no longer an exception. And they brought in massive punishments for people who were going to be punished. And I was one of the first people to face that punishment, which was I organised 40 people in a perfectly safe way, with marks, with little bollards marked on the ground that we'd learned from what we've done in Hulme about the anti-racist protest. 40 health workers safely, socially distanced, with masks, with gel. And they told me to close it down. So after some negotiation, I did close it down, and I received a £10,000 fine. And £10,000, just to give you an indication of how much money that is, we were protesting about a 1% pay rise. If I'd used my 1% pay rise to pay my fine, it would have taken me 56 years to pay that fine. So that's a reflection of how much it is compared to an ordinary worker's wage. 56 years to pay off that fine. And I compare it to, there's a man called Dominic Cummings who was an advisor, a horrible right-wing advisor to Boris Johnson. And he, when he had COVID, travelled all the way up to his parents' house, stopping at service stations with COVID, which is actually quite dangerous because it's very likely he will have passed that on to people at the service station, and you're not allowed to travel as an absolute ban. And he knew that. He wasn't fined anything. But had he been fined £10,000, if he had done, it would have taken him just 3 months of his pay rise to pay that same £10,000. And that's why these fines are about intimidating poor working class people, and they're supposed to deter you from your ability to fight back. So they're supposed to, and it does have an impact. Other health workers that I know that wanted to protest about the 1% saw my fine and called off protests that they had planned because they didn't want to face a £10,000 fine. So it does work that it puts some people off. The week after I had my fine. A woman had been murdered in London, and her body was missing for a week, and then it was found, and then a man had been charged with her murder, and that man happened to be a serving police officer in the London police. So women in London wanted to remember and have a vigil for Sarah Everard, the woman who'd been murdered, and they also wanted to use it to protest and to fight for an end to violence against women. That protest was banned. They threatened the people who organised it with a £10,000 fine if they went ahead. So the organisers said, well, we won't go ahead, but enough thousands of women and men came and said, we're protesting anyway, we don't care if it's not illegal. So they arrived, and the very police force that a member of their force murdered the woman they were commemorating then attacked the women who were protesting. And there were pictures on our televisions and in our papers of women being held down on the floor by big male Metropolitan Police officers. And I think the outrage that people felt, both about the original murder and about the attack on the police, the government responded by the very next day announcing the police crime and bill that would restrict people's protest. And since then, there have been protests all over Britain that really it's impossible to stop. There's another one in Manchester today. I'm sure there will be, and this is probably our 8th or 9th sort of protest in the couple of weeks since that's come in. And some of them are called by just individuals, some of them are called by anti-racist groups, some of them are called by women's groups. There's been a whole sort of spontaneous sort of outburst of anger. And I think for me, it reflects the fact that there is that the Tories have misjudged the mood. So when people did protest over the Sarah Everard murder and then over the right to protest, the police were suddenly in a position where they were having to, some of them they ignored, some of them they fined and attacked people with. And but one of the consequences of defying the ban and saying we're going to protest even though the law doesn't allow it, at the moment it's potentially unlawful, because there were protests, the government have now, in the new legislation about COVID, have said that we can now protest, although there are restrictions and cautions on it. Part of how you stop bans is you say, well, we're ignoring the ban and we're going to protest in big numbers. And that's one of the big lessons that I think we will have learned from what's happened, is that, the best way to break bans on protests is not just to argue in Parliament or in courts, but actually the best way is to go out and actually fight on and have big enough numbers on the streets that in a way the law becomes the reality of we're on the streets, what are you going to do? And in a way, we've done that in Hulme every week for the last 10 months. We've been out taking the knee every week. And I think that's what's given me and Lamin a bit of confidence about thinking it was some practice about how to do it safely, but also some confidence about thinking you can't stop doing it. And I think for us, I think the lessons now are that, that there is a lot of anger out there that needs to be politically coordinated and organised. And when you do put a call out, people do come. And you need to unite everybody with no one left behind. So we should oppose the whole police and crime bill, which means we stand up for the Gypsy, Roma and traveller community. We stand up for migrants. We stand up for the climate change protesters. We stand up for Black Lives Matter. We stand up for the women protesting. We stand against Islamophobia. We stand against all the divisions that they try and use, and we will not leave anybody behind in that process. And therefore we will fight against the whole bill, that we will take those street movements that are massive into our trade unions. So we have model motions, and we have sort of, trying to organise amongst trade unions to try and get that feel of we can do something about this, and we have to, through local branches, through regions and through national if we can, to try and get more union banners that reflect the organised working class onto those street protest, because there are lots of people who come who are trade unionists, but they don't come as trade unionists with a trade union banner, and we need to pull those movements together to make them stronger. We have an 80 majority in Parliament of Tory MPs, so if we just rely on Parliament, this bill will go through. And the last thing we have to say is that if it is passed, and we don't know whether they might back down at this point, because they were going for a high speed sort of pushing it through when it first was pushed through the day after the Sarah Everard demonstration. They're now looking like they're going on a slower sort of motion for how long they're going to do it. And they may drop it altogether. They might see sense and think this is not the right time to do it. But if they do pass it, I think what we need to do is learn the lessons that the best way to stop the law is to make the law unworkable by continuing to defy it, and to do that in big enough numbers that we actually make it an unworkable law and they're forced to retract it. And I think that's the lessons for us at the moment in terms of the way that we work, and we need to unite the widest forces around trying to do that, and there is a real potential in Britain to do so.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we're having a problem with streaming on Facebook and YouTube. I'm sorry, and we are not being able to broadcast. Okay, but we will invite. We're inviting now, unless. Well, actually, I have a question, Karen. Because I've been living here for altogether nearly 20 years. And it's always very difficult for me to find information and to find people that I can join to struggle with, to fight for my social rights, for my civil rights. It's like, I mean, I just heard from you the fight that the teachers' unions are presenting, but there's no other way to find out about it. In the United States, there's a program, Democracy Now! By Amy Goodman, and you can get a lot of information from there. There are some others, The Nation and some others, but here I've always found myself like lost in the lack of information. Is that made on purpose?
Oh, I don't think they like to share sort of resistance. One of the things I've always said is that it's not good enough to just win a fight. You have to be able to tell people that you've won the fight in order to inspire other people to see that it's possible. It's not good enough just to demonstrate, but you have to be able to tell people about that demonstration and show them it in order for it to be effective. And that the sort of the narrative that comes out of it is about the possibilities that it is to change the world that we live in for a better world, for a socialist world where people do come before profit. And that's one of the reasons why I'm in the Socialist Workers' Party, is because we have a weekly paper. We now have more stuff online than we used to. So we have sort of an online long read where we have some longer articles rather than a weekly paper. And the weekly paper will also put out on Facebook and on Twitter and Instagram, which I'm not very good at, stories that as things happen. So if there is a protest or there is a fight, we can take a little video, we can put it out, and it will be. And I think those things are important for socialists, that there is, you can't rely on the official media. Sometimes they're very good and sometimes they just ignore things altogether. So it's important that the socialists have an alternative way of distributing the information about protests that are taking place. And I think that's true everywhere, that you need that information. That's why what you're doing in terms of sharing information is really important, because often you don't find out, you know, across the world there are some fantastic examples of things that have happened that can be very inspiring, but you don't know anything about them. And I think that it's really important that we do share and publicize all the victories and all the attacks that are coming, because the ruling class talk to each other across the world. It's important that we talk to each other across the world, and we extend both the hand of solidarity, but also we learn from each other about what's worked and what doesn't work.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Karen. Now I'm going to open the microphone for Lamin, our social activist from Manchester.
Yes.
Welcome to our broadcast, Lamin. Thank you very much for being with us.
No worries. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very well.
Amazing. Well, thank you for having me on. And yeah, I feel like I've been kind of learning from the best, being shoulder to shoulder with Karen every week for the past 10 months. And I remember back in, I think it was maybe July, when it was kind of the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, I made a suggestion to the group in Hulme. I said, listen, I think maybe we should do it once a month or once every few weeks, just to keep the momentum, because I didn't want the numbers to be small. And then we did a vote, very very democratic vote, and every single person voted against it and said, no, we want to keep coming every single week. And I was made up to think that everyone was, going to continue. And then week on week on week, people just come out in the numbers. We get new people every few weeks. And it's given me personally the inspiration and the motivation and the drive and the determination to continue doing the things that I'm doing separately to just taking the knee. So although some people see it as passive, taking the knee, what does it achieve? It is it's a simple physical gesture, isn't it, essentially? But also it's like-minded people coming together week on week, having discussions, being a physical presence, and like I said, giving us that, myself and Karen and others, that drive to do things that we're doing separately. So in terms of my kind of journey into kind of becoming more politically active, I come from a political family. My mum was in the SWP back in the 80s and probably 90s, but my whole family are very political on both sides. And essentially, I've been going on protests for as long as I can remember, since I was a kid. And I went to the anti-Iraq war protest, I think it was 2003, 2004, where there was over 1 million people in the streets in London. Jeremy Corbyn spoke at it. I was probably about 7 years old. I don't remember much of it, but, just to give you an example of, my political roots, you could say. So last June, it was the end of May, in fact, that George Floyd was killed. And then obviously the Black Lives Matter movement kind of lit fire in June, and it lit a fire under a lot of people, a lot of, especially Black and Asian people, were reflecting on their own experiences of racism. And it was like, I think because also it was in the middle of lockdown, people are watching this barbaric video of a man having his life sucked from him in front of us. And actually, the mad thing is, when I watched it for the first time, I didn't have any reaction whatsoever. I just watched it very subjectively, as it was just any other normal video, because it was almost normalized to see that sort of violence. And then I think later on that day, it kicked in. And there was another video as well circulating the same day of a woman in a park threatening to call the police on a black man, screaming as if he was going to hurt her. So she knew what she was doing, trying to call the police to the woods over it. It was like a dog walking thing. So the video only landed with me maybe a few hours later, and that almost disturbed me as well. And then I watched it a few times, and it was just a brutal, horrible, like I said, barbaric video. And then it enraged us. And then obviously, because we're in lockdown as well, it was more in your face. I think maybe if we weren't in lockdown, it would have still had a big reaction. It would have still had protests. It would have still had uproar, but not to the scale it did have, because everyone was in their houses and they were forced to be confronted with this racism. And the thing is, this sort of racism and brutality and violence has been happening for hundreds of years anyway, against Black and brown and Asian people. But like I said, it was forced, it was rammed in your face. So the responses were so visceral, and there were so many people on the streets. I remember going to the protest on the Saturday and the Sunday in Manchester, and, middle of lockdown, middle of the pandemic. And to be honest with you, that was the last thing on people's minds, because this was more important, fighting back against racism. And our brothers and sisters in America and across the world, it affects us all at the end of the day. These ruling classes in America, Britain gave birth to America at the end of the day. It's partly Britain's responsibility anyway for the racism out there is very overt, where in Britain it's more covert. It's still fairly in your face in Britain, but it's a lot more, for me, it's a lot more deep rooted. It's a lot more institutionalized. It's a lot more insidious, and just kind of really, they stack the odds against you from birth, essentially. And obviously it's a majority white country as well. So yeah, people reflected on their own experiences of racism. We went to the protest. It was great. There was lots of action and lots of groups formed, and people like Karen and the SWP and Stand Up to Racism, who've been going for years, and Black Lives Matter, who obviously have been going since 2016. They actioned small groups around Manchester, and there was, I think, probably about 8 groups of Take the Knee. There was one in Didsbury, Chawton, Hulme, Old Trafford, Stretford, maybe Levenshulme. There's a few groups where people were regularly coming out week on week taking the knee, and obviously it was everywhere. You couldn't hide. Black Lives Matter and all these media corporations made a promise to, we're going to do this, and we're going to listen, join the dots, and we're going to be better. And all the football teams and the Premier League and everything, it was everywhere, wasn't it? It was a huge kind of movement, you could say, although Keir Starmer called it a moment. But we're proving that it is a movement, and it will continue to stay in, hopefully, the public's sphere for as long as possible, until it goes, essentially, until the balance is shifted. So for me personally, the George Floyd situation made me reflect on my own experiences, and I've had all sorts of kind of overt, in your face, kind of just blatant racism. I remember after Brexit walking down the street, and someone walked past me. This is in Manchester as well, South Manchester. I was in Withington, and someone just looked at me. This guy, he's just come out of the pub, and he looked at me and then just called me a black cunt, and I was like, wow, couldn't believe it. And obviously I confronted him and whatever, but I couldn't believe the confidence it gave people, and that's ultimately, it comes from the top. It's racist policies from a racist government, and it trickles down into society, and people think it's acceptable, and they get away with it, and they're protected by the same systems that oppress us. And the crazy thing is, these oppressive racist systems oppress white working class people, who stereotypically are more likely, to have conflict. I had a very good conversation once with someone. It was a prison officer from West Yorkshire, from Wakefield, working class kind of mining town. And he said in the 60s, when lots of Indian women came over, Indian men and women came over, in fact, obviously in the 40s, 50s, 60s, Jamaican, African and Indian people came over to help rebuild the country after the war. In that particular area, the women would do the factory work. So they would work in factories, and they would work like 9 till 3, for example. So they could drop the kids off at 9, then go at 8 or whatever, drop the kids off at school, go to the factory from 9, and they finish from 3. Then they go pick the kids up. And that was kind of what they did for, presumably hundreds of years, working in the factories. Then when the Indian workers came over to live and settle in the UK, the factory workers and the people at the top exploited that. And instead of continuing to give the jobs to those local women, they gave the jobs to the Indians. But what they did was they paid them a lot less. Mm-hmm. So they saw there was room there to exploit those workers, pay them less money, and get the same work, if not more work. So then you've got the angry local white working class women turning on those Indian workers. So that's a perfect example of how sophisticated it is, and turning people against each other. And that just, the kind of penny dropped for me when he told me this story, and I thought, that's exactly what they have to do. So what actually should have happened is those local women should have turned their anger at the factory owners, at the millionaires, or they might not be millionaires at the time, but the rich owner of that business exploiting workers. So people before profit, again, another organisation that are really important. So anyway, going back to June and Black Lives Matter movement, I personally reflected on my own experiences, and the worst kind of racism I've ever experienced was deep-rooted institutionalized racism. I went to drama school when I was 18 to study acting, and when I was in my second year, a girl, and again, I don't know why she felt comfortable or confident enough to say this, but she did. She was partnered with me and my friend who's black, and she was visibly upset. And I asked her, what's wrong? What's wrong? You're not happy about working with us. Initially, I thought it was to do with us as actors, not anything else. She then went on to say she's not happy to be seen on screen with 2 black men, and she doesn't want to work with 2 black actors. So I was just baffled. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And then the next day I sat her down and said, look, come on, articulate yourself a little bit better. And she said, look, I'm just not happy to be seen on screen with 2 black men. So I'm not sure where this fear or issue came from, but obviously it was clearly and obviously racist. She said multiple times, oh, there's only 3 of you in the year. Why do I have to work with 2 of you? It was like mad. But again, because I've experienced racism at this point, I was like 19, it didn't really faze me. I was very young and possibly naive and just took it. I was just like, look, we need to talk about it. Obviously it's an issue, but we'll address it. We can sit down, educate you, whatever. I wasn't angry. Do you know what I mean? She was a friend, in fact. But I was just like, this is crazy. But what I did need was for the school to take a very clear and obvious stance on, right, okay, that's racist. How do we educate you? And if I was younger, it wouldn't have happened. I would have lost my head. But as I was a bit older, I calmed down a bit and I learned how to deal with people better. And then on the following week, the school sat down and didn't bring the word racism into the conversation once. And in fact, they painted me and my friend to be the aggressors and the 2 angry black kids with chips on our shoulders who just need to get on with it. What's your problem? They then I made a formal complaint. They then reviewed that, and they came back in an official response from the principal was that the comments she made weren't racist. So I couldn't believe it. This school, this liberal drama school, which is a lot of people pay £9,000 a year. It's a private school. It's not a university. It's a drama school. So you have to pay the fees yourself. It's quite elitist, to be honest with you. I couldn't have afforded to go if I didn't get my scholarship. So I got a full scholarship to go train there. But you're around people who are from different backgrounds and possibly wealthier backgrounds. So yeah, it was elitist and there was lots of issues anyway. So when the school came back with that response, obviously it sent me absolutely loco. I went crazy. I could not understand how they couldn't come to the conclusion that this was racism. And it affected me for a long, long, long time. It put me into maybe 6 months or so of depression. I was very down. I was very angry. I was very confused. It just baffled me. And so 4 years down the line, 4 years down the line, I just put it in a box, focused on my career, and, I was going to kill them with success. I cut the school off. I cut all my kind of ties with the school off. And, that was when you're young, you're in the prime of your life, 18, 21, you should have enjoyed those, those years there. But obviously it was very different for me. And then also for my friends, there was a shared experience for all Black and Asian people at this school. So in June, again, after the killing of George Floyd, people were reflecting on their own experiences, looking within themselves and like, wow, what have I experienced? It feels personal. So people turn to Twitter, as our generation do, the younger generation, and we're putting tweets out, sharing our experiences. And what happened was across the board in London, in Liverpool, Manchester, all your major cities where all your drama schools are, there was this theme of all Black and Asian students had experienced like really bad racism whilst at drama school. So it proved that it was clearly systemic. And there was a big outpour of reaction on Twitter and lots of engagements with these different tweets, and the media were getting it on board with it. And again, if we'd have done that a year ago, I don't think they would have got that reaction, because racism, yes, it was in society, but it wasn't on the agenda, if you like. So it was it was a storm, wasn't it, essentially? It was a storm where it was in the public domain and the media wanted to get a piece of it. And I was aware of that. And I think a lot of people were aware of that, but we had to exploit it for what it was if we actually wanted to implement change. So the tweets were doing their thing. And then once social media, this is the great thing as well. Social media is the one thing the government and the ruling classes can't really control, because you can get your job, you can get dragged through social media, you can get your job got, you can get sacked, you can actually implement change via social media, which is a new form of media. So we had to use it for what it was. And then once you use social media, the mainstream media then will cover it if it gets obviously enough clout, if you like. So the mainstream media covered it, and luckily my drama school got brought into the conversation with a list of a few others in London and stuff, and Liverpool. And then it kind of settled down. And again, we were still taking the knee every week in Hulme, so we still had that drive and that energy to be like, look, this is still important. We're not going away. And a few months later, a group of me and a group of other students from our school, from our drama school, all alumni, drafted an open letter. And the open letter was just highlighting experiences of racism. We then put that on social media. I'll go the quick way around it because it's a long story, but we put that on social media again. That then got lots of engagements, and the mainstream media covered it again at a high level. I think ITV was headline news in London, their local thing, and it was the #1 story in Granada Northwest. So the whole of the Northwest, it was the #1 story. So it got, again, great coverage, and we needed that to be able to implement the change, because we were calling for an overhaul in the leadership. Because what it felt like was, it was us versus racism at a very small level, but it was institutionalized. So we needed to be successful. It was always going to be successful because of the drive we had to rid that particular school of that racist leadership. And in the hope that it'll be a domino effect and the rest will topple and it trickles down. But also, even if it doesn't trickle down, if it gives people inspiration, look, if you get organised, if you keep that drive, if you push for change, if you have truth on your side, you'll get it. So we pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and it was a long, long road. It was 7 months in total, back and forth meetings with board members, tweets, interviews with media, everything. And it was all for one end goal, which was for the principal and the senior management to be gone. And then in January of this year, the 4th of January, got a tweet again where it all started off a girl who was a current student at the school, and she said, look, he's gone. And we were just absolutely made up. It was like this whole thing, this guy, he was real, dangerous, horrible, oppressive, abuser of his power, abuser of his position. And he had no intention of leaving that institution. He'd been at the school for over a decade. He would have been earning a lot of money. And he was someone who fell victim to the whole Black Lives Matter. Well, he's not a victim, actually. He suffered the consequences of his actions for years because of the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, because of people taking to the streets, because of it being in the media domain, because of people protesting week on week in Hulme and across Manchester. He felt, he got what he deserved, and that was due to the movement that was birthed out of it. But obviously, it's a much bigger, that's a very small scale thing compared to what some people are fighting for. And I've always said that. I've said, people in London, families of the Grenfell fire victims, people who have had deaths in their family, they're the real warriors, because they're going to have to fight till the last day they're breathing to get justice for their families, and they might be fighting for a very, very long time. You can see the families of the Hillsborough victims, the way the media tried to spin it and the police failed them and let them down. They were fighting for over 20 years until they got some form of justice, and that will never bring the families back. So we knew that on the grand scale of things, it was a small thing, but it was a successful campaign. And then I think that just kind of ignited a fire in my kind of the way I was more politically active. And obviously, because I live in Hulme and see Karen with a kneel down, I mixed in different circles and got involved with different organisations and different campaigns. One of them that was more of a positive thing to focus on throughout that last year, and we're seeing the success of that now, was the Len Johnson story. Len Johnson's a black boxer from Manchester, mixed race. His dad was from Sierra Leone, his mum was Irish, Mancunian. Born in the early 1900s, and he was an unbelievable boxer, and I'm a fan of boxing, so I couldn't believe I didn't know the story. But also, going back to what you guys were saying before and what Karen was saying, there's a reason these stories are kept from us. There's a reason we don't know about them. It's because they don't want us to be inspired. They don't want us to have local black figures or local heroes, for that matter, full stop. And history is taught by the oppressed, is taught by the oppressor, not the oppressed. So it's really about kind of getting that story out there. So he had 135 fights. He won 93, but he was denied the right to box for the British title because of his skin colour. So there was a colour bar in place at the time. And that colour bar was actually introduced by Winston Churchill, who was a racist. So, yeah, Winston Churchill banned interracial boxing, and he was denied the right to ever box for a title. So, and he was a massive activist as well. He wasn't just a boxer. He fought outside of the ring. He stood for local election year on year on Moss Side. He fought back against the racist colour bar policies in pubs, the famous saying, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. He fought back against that. You know, he was friends with Paul Robeson. He was an unbelievable man and an unbelievable story and a local Mancunian icon. But no one knew the story. So I was kind of, you know, inspired again by the Technique in Hulme and other things and the drama school campaign to kind of get this out there. And I joined heads with people who had already been living with that story for years. I said, look, I want to get on board, like anything I can do to get this story out there, I'm doing it. Got really inspired by it and really enraged by it. Could not believe, I remember that moment I read the article that I got sent, could not believe I'd never heard of him. You know, I've got a picture of Muhammad Ali. I've had it since I was 7 years old above my bed. And Muhammad Ali is an icon for so many reasons, you know, for his activism, for his fighter in the ring, for everything. But we had our very own Muhammad Ali in Manchester, and I didn't know about him. So I made it my mission to just get the story out there to as many people as possible. And again, because of the Black Lives Matter movement, it was snapped up like that, and the media got on board with it. Sky Sports ran a story, BBC Sport ran a story, ITV ran a story. We got lots of boxers on board with the campaign. You know, Anthony Joshua, Amir, world champions, current and ex-British fighters, all showing support to get a statue built of Len in the city centre, because there's still not a single monument to a black person in the city of Manchester, which is crazy. So that's kind of bubbling up underneath. But the main thing, and the thing that I really wanted to achieve, was how do we tell this story on a big scale? And we've been able to get funding for a play to take it into schools to educate children, hundreds of children, hopefully thousands of children across Manchester and then eventually the UK. And we've developed that play now. We've got funding for it. We're in the process of casting the play, and that will be going to schools across Manchester in May, so next month, and then hopefully for the foreseeable future. I'm sure in Black History Month it'll get fully booked, but we want it to be booked month on month, all year round, and we want that conversation to continue in the classrooms and in your schools with the next generation, because they're the only way we can actually shift the balance and start to change things. And we've seen what happened with Pimlico Academy in London. You know, the head teacher, again, a white middle-aged man, protected by the government, protected by racist policies, decided to ban colourful hijabs for young Muslim women who are already an oppressed group who are up against it as it is. He decided to oppress them even more and go, look, you can't express yourself and wear a colourful hijab, and also ban Afro hair. You know, when I was a kid, I had a huge Afro. Me and my friend, when we were about 10, we grew our Afros out and we had huge Afros. And if we went to that school, he would have tried to make us shave our heads. So couldn't believe it. But the kids, they protested it. They protested against it, and they had the demands reached by the afternoon, and the head teacher hopefully will be sacked. He should not be in that job for much longer. But either way, he had to go back because the kids and the power to the people and all the people on the ground, the children on the ground went, do you know what? We're not coming back to lesson. We are not coming back to lesson until you change those rules. And so it shows people there's inspiration out there from all these different stories, and the power of protest, the power of being standing up for your rights and not just accepting what's given to you. So for me, the only way we end racism is through the next generation, through the children, through young people. And we've seen in the Kill the Bill protest, you know, all the young women coming out. Got really emotional a few weeks ago. A young girl came and she spoke in front of like hundreds of people about how she'd been sexually abused. And I thought, do you know how much bravery that takes to go up there in front of hundreds of people and just tell your story? So it's inspiring seeing all these people coming together, doing their thing to fight back against these systems and this British government, because we've had them, you know, we've had this Tory government in power for over 10 years now, 2010, and they're not going away anytime soon. And someone told me the other day that when you I can't remember what it's called, but basically when you can predict the polls and stuff, the Tory government are still in power and would still get in. If we had a general election tomorrow, they would get in again. I think it's called like the prediction something. But to think that everything they've done during the pandemic, the free school meal scheme, you know, 300 odd MPs not voting to essentially starve young children. And you've got the likes of Marcus Rashford, a footballer, having to be the opposition instead of Keir Starmer, who's been elected to be the leader of the Labour Party. You've got Marcus Rashford from Wythenshawe, from South Manchester, who's a footballer. It's not his job to do that. being the leader of the opposition. And again, he's obviously taking inspiration from the movement that's happening on the ground. So it feels like we're living through, you know, a couple of years, you know, these next few years are going to be crucial, but it feels like 2020 especially, and this year and the next few years is definitely a moment of history. And it's about not forgetting. It's about not forgetting and keeping it going, keeping it in people's faces. You know, I've got my own career, I've got my own job and my own life that I have to focus on. But I do know one thing, or whatever happens in my career, I'll continue to keep up the momentum. I'll continue to speak out. I'll continue to be involved in different organisations. And hopefully, if I get to a big enough platform in my career as an actor, I'll be able to shine light on lots of different issues. And that is the motivation, especially this year, because last year, obviously, we're in a pandemic. I was just so engrossed in political campaigns that I forgot about my career. But actually, you know, it's important to live our lives as well and be happy and pursue our careers and passions and whatever else, but also be there consistently to bang the drum and make noise about any sort of oppression that is going on around the world, and especially if it's in our direct vicinity. So yeah, we just have to keep the momentum, and Hulme and the Take the Knee group and the Stand Up to Racism group in Hulme are a perfect example of keeping up that momentum and keeping up inspiration. And I'm learning from the best with Karen and everyone else involved. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, no, thank you for being with us. That was, I mean, amazing, an amazing way to put a perspective into racism and into how the establishment tries to disguise it, you know, and has trained the society to dismiss it as something personal, something that, well, is your imagination, that was hundreds of years ago, but not now. You know, you can walk on the street, you can walk on the pavement, and nobody's asking you to walk on the road. Nobody's asking you to sit at the back of the buses. What are you asking for? You know, but nevertheless, it's there, very subtle, but it's there. Thank you so much, Lamin. Thank you for sharing all this with us. We want to invite now. We have Nathela Ashraf. She has joined us, and we would like to ask her to make some comments about this, and from your point of view as a Muslim, as a woman, what would you like to tell us, Nathela, please?
Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, my name's Naila. Apologies for not having my camera on.
Nehela. Okay, I'm sorry.
My Wi-Fi isn't great. But fantastic session. Really good to hear the speakers. As always, I do know them well, because I am part of Stand Up to Racism. So yeah, it's lovely to hear them. But I think for us, Lamin touched on it, wasn't it? The anger that we all had around George Floyd and those videos. It's, you know, we have seen other videos. Let's be very clear. This isn't the first time we know that the US police have killed a Black man. But I think the significance of it this year was the fact that actually we are in a pandemic, and it's so stark during this pandemic, the disproportionate impact the pandemic is having on the Black community. If you look at who has lost their lives, who is, you know, more likely to be ill, in addition to that, who is more likely to be stopped and harassed by the police when we're going about our, you know, the jobs that we do, you know, the journeys that we have to, you know, there was an idea of somebody was being stopped. Why are you shopping? Why are you visiting your relatives? So it happens to be a Black man. And at the same time, we had Cummings being able to travel hundreds of miles. I think it almost came together as a kind of perfect storm. And I think that's why we've seen some real anger on the streets and a real, I think, sense of we can no longer wait. The pandemic has really highlighted how racism literally kills in the world we live in today, in the society we live in today. And I think that's why the movement has been so powerful out on the streets, and it continues to be powerful. I think you look at the anger around the policing bill that they're trying to push through, and the way that people have come together. I mean, every Saturday we've had a demonstration in the centre of Manchester, and it hasn't just been Stand Up to Racism or a particular group that is under attack. And let's be honest, we're all under attack. And we've recognised that we've all come together, and we'll be out today in Piccadilly at 1 p.m. And I do think that we have already won so much. It is really important to say this. We have won so much already. Lamin talked about, people, the narrative around Black Lives Matter, the politicians talking about it, the sports players taking the knee, football players are still taking the knee before matches. They're doing that because of the anger on the ground. We have pushed them to do this. Those stars, I mean, these sports players are stars in their own right, have had a platform but never been able to use that platform or been allowed to use that platform. And we, by pushing it on the streets, have said it's okay for you to do that. In fact, we force them to do it because they don't want to be on the wrong side of history. All of a sudden, clubs are supporting them, their managers are supporting them. Because let's face it, football and sports, all sports are part of a, they're a money-making industry, aren't they? They're not there for the good of the sports players or just for the sake of playing sports. So we have already won that. We've also, I do want to say this, we talk about the bill that we're all campaigning against here. Let's be very clear, that bill is being pushed out because they are scared of what we have already achieved. They pushed that bill out to kill the movement around Black Lives Matter and XR, and they state it clearly. The policy documents talk about the fact that we need to do something to stop these groups. So they have pushed that bill from, not from a, I would say from a position of confidence, but from a position of fear. They need to do something. They don't know what it is, but they need to do something. And I would also say the new report, the race report, the shocking scandal of that report, we're not surprised either, because actually it was always the report they've come out about racism was always about changing the narrative, because Black Lives Matter over the summer and anti-racist organizations have won the argument, I think, in wider society, that there is systemic racism across our society and we need a change. I think we won that argument, and because of that, the conversations throughout every part of our lives and every part of our society are taking place. It's not just about the police, it's about the education, it's about the health system, it's about police, it's about everything. And I think we won that narrative, we shifted it, and we have created a momentum behind it. And I think they have pushed this report to shift that narrative, because let's be honest, every time they do reports, governments do reports, and they take years before they publish anything. Actually, they push this through. I've never seen them do something so fast. If only they could be so fast on having a report around why Black people are losing their lives because of the pandemic. They're dragging their feet on that. They're talking about wait till that's over. But actually, with this report, they pushed it through. And they push it through because actually they want to put their hands up and say, look, there's no institutional racism. It's just individuals. It's just a few bad apples. Blame the individual racists. Actually, no, we know it's society that's racist. And I think it's really interesting that even with that report, they've had to backtrack a bit. And even I think Boris Johnson, the day after it was published, said something along the lines, oh, well, yes, we do recognize we need to, there is still some work to be done, trying to recognize the anger that's out there. So I do think this is a moment in here, not a moment, but a movement, a real movement that we're making our own history. You see the demonstrations. Lamin talked about the young women who line up to come and speak. Some of them as young as 15, if not younger, and they are the new leadership of the movement. I think that's really important to say. They are the future of our movement. And I think we, as socialists, as organizers, like within the organization I'm with, Stand Up to Racism, we have a responsibility to give them a platform and give them the support to go out there and build this mass movement, and more important, to lead this mass movement. And I think that is the thing that gives me so much hope. When I'm on the demonstrations, I'll be out in Piccadilly, in St. Peter's Square at 1 p.m. today, and I can absolutely guarantee that the majority of people on that demonstration will be young and angry, but more importantly, confident and willing to work with everyone to fight for change.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you so much, Nahila, for this. And by the way, I'm going to remind you at the end of the meeting, but yes, there's a protest in St. Peter's Square at 1 p.m. in hopefully you can join us there. And we also have Julia. Julia, welcome to our meeting. Would you mind telling me how to pronounce your surname, please?
Sorry, come again?
Yeah, how do you pronounce your surname?
Mwaluki.
Mwaluki. Okay, yes. Thank you very much. Julia, we know that you have been an anti-racist activist, and you are also a trade union representative. Could you like to say some words for the participants in our meeting, please?
Yes, yeah. One thing I wanted to emphasize is the fact that the young people realize that they need to stand up. I was very surprised to hear a girl from Australia who immigrated a few years ago to mention that 250 years ago, when British white people moved England to go to Australia, the first priority was to remove the Aboriginal from their land, get their land, started abusing them, maltreating them, so that they can take that land. For her to recognize that and to say the way she's white privilege is something which I never even dreamed that a white for that age can say it. She knew it exists, but not to that extent that she's free to express it in public, say that we need to stop things like that, because those people, that's where they believe, that's where they live, that is their life. Yeah, I was very impressed. So I feel like we need to continue this movement. It's good. People from different backgrounds, they will come and share their experience, which give motivation to even the shy one who couldn't normally speak in public. They will come and raise their concern. This is the movement we need to continue with. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of you. I wonder if any of you have questions for each other, or do you want to make a final comment before we wrap up this meeting? Thank you, Lamin. Lamin says that we're having a great conversation, and yes, indeed, we are having that. Well, I would like just to add something, because a few days ago, you probably know about this, the British government came up with an announcement in the news that in their opinion, racism has been eradicated from the society, and that indeed the United Kingdom should be seen as a model to eradicate racism. And honestly, when I heard that, I thought, you're gonna be joking. This is a joke. This is not April Fool. This is a joke, you know. And what I personally think is that they make these comments so they continue permeating in the society the idea that there is no racism, that as Julia and Lamin's and well, all of you have pointed out, it's just a matter of personal issues that we have with ourselves. Me as a Mexican, as you know, and you being Black people and me, brown people. Well, when you talk about this with other people, they tell you, well, no, you know, you shouldn't think that way. There's no racism. And now that the government officially says that there's no racism, well, it's because there's no racism. But at the end of the day, I think it's a fallacy that the government wants to believe, because it's convenient for them to keep having this pretending that they are really taking racism seriously, when indeed under the table they keep kicking us in all any ways they can. That was my comment, you know. Yeah, thank you, Lamin. Thank you. Well, unless you have any other comments, yeah, go ahead, Lamin. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to just really quickly say, I just wanted to say really important. I think these types of conversations and these types of meetings are also really important, just as important as the protest. And even if it's a small group or it's, you know, 70 people on it's important to have those organising and those and keep it, you know, keep our minds essentially alive, because, you know, we can't just go to the protest and go home and then be like, oh yeah, that's done now. You know, it's about continuing the movement behind the scenes. And from experience, or from new experience, actually it's those conversations behind the scenes that can implement change, and having those conversations with like-minded people. So yeah, just want to say how important this conversation was, and thank you for facilitating it.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen. Would you
Yeah, I
like to say
just want to
something?
add to that, because I mean, in Britain today, people may not know, but Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, has died, and he was
Yeah.
an out-and-out racist who's come out with loads and loads of racist comments, and he is being lauded in the press and on the television as some great hero that we have to worship, by the same government that thinks there's something criminal about taking the knee and giving respect into the fight against racism. And I just think that illustrates the fight we have to have. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they bring out a report that says that racism doesn't exist. I think they are pandering to the right-wing forces within society and genuinely trying to mobilize them in order to have a go at the fight that we are at the moment. The fight against anti-racism has got better and is on the up, and it's much harder for them, and their defensive response is actually to be more racist, to try and mobilize their side. And I think it is a fight that we need to fight, and we have never won anything without having to fight for it. The right to vote, the right to have a contract at work, the right for equal pay, the right for any of those things. We have laws, but the laws don't protect us. It's actually our right to stand up and defend ourselves that has won those things, and that's what will continue to be. And so we will fight, not just for the right sort of, you know, to protest, but we'll use that right to fight for the injustices that exist in the world. And I think there is a growing number of people on our side who want to do it, and that's what's inspiring and hopeful. And what we have to do is consolidate that to make it as powerful as possible.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Karen. Thank you for that comment. Well, yes, thank you very much. Well, I want to thank you, Christian, for organizing this. We do apologize for not being able to broadcast this on Facebook and YouTube today. For whatever reason, we couldn't sort that out, but it's being recorded, and Christian is gonna upload this, and as soon as we finish the meeting, we are we're gonna try to invite more people and to make these meetings more often. It's been great for me, guys, to meet you all, to know that there are activists in the United Kingdom. Sometimes I think that they are not, but yeah, it's been very inspiring to hearing all of you. And we want to thank you for being with us. And so we'll be in touch, and we'll see you pretty soon. Okay, thank you to all of you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. See you
Bye.
soon. Okay, I'm going to end the
Thanks
meeting
again.
now. Okay, I'm going to end the meeting now. Okay,
Bye.
thank you. Bye.
Thank you.